All right, well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Southern California Chapter of ICEAA's fall webinar. I see that we've got a handful of people in the audience. I'm sure a few more people will be joining us, but we like to get started on time. So today, let me make sure I'm on the right screen here. Oops, too far. We've got an exciting program for you. Obviously, we're doing the welcome now. We're going to do a little bit of introduction of who everyone is. We do have a special in remembrance section today that we're going to discuss one of our members. We'll talk about what's going on in the Southern California chapter, and then a little bit on the chapter elections. And then we'll get into our main presentation by Brittany Clayton at the RAND Corporation, which is on digital engineering implications on weapon system costs. We'll do a few announcements at the end, and we'll wrap it up. So with that being said, I just want to remind you, if you've been at these webinars before, or if it's your first time, I want to share with you who the officers and the directors at large are for our Southern California Chapter Board. Some of these people have been involved in the Southern California Chapter for years and years and years. Others are fairly new, but that's good. We like a mixture of people. And then we have some volunteers who have been helping us throughout the year with various activities, so I wanted to recognize them too. And now, I will turn it over to Sherry. Megan, I forgot to tell you that Sherry is also speaking. Can you let her speak or unmute her?
Yep, she's ready for it. She's ready to go when Sherry's ready.
Okay. All right, Sherry, are you available to talk about Barry right now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay. I was trying to call in, but I wasn't sure how that procedure worked. Okay, as Karen mentioned, she and Hank had asked me to say a few words about Barry Boehm. Barry was a colleague, a role model, and an inspiration to me that I shared over half my life with, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. I have to admit that it was a challenge to compress my remarks because there's so much to tell about Barry. Dr. Barry Boehm passed away on August 20th. He was 87 years old. Barry was an icon in the software engineering community, which includes software cost estimation, systems engineering, and software risk analysis. Barry was a high achiever, believing in academic excellence. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics from Harvard University in 1957, and then went on to complete a Master's of Science degree in 1961 and a PhD in 1964, both in mathematics at UCLA. So if you do the math, no pun intended, you'll find that he completed his postgraduate work in record time. Barry also received several honorary degrees from several universities and institutions. Barry was a prolific writer. He authored more than 900 publications, including over 200 journal articles, 6 textbooks, and hundreds of conference papers, in addition to presentations, keynote addresses, and webinars. His publications have over 70,000 citations listed in Google Scholar, and Springer Analysis lists him as the second most cited software engineer in the world. 2 of Barry's textbooks that you may be familiar with are the 1981 Software Engineering Economics, which documents his constructive cost model, the COCOMO model. And for the software cost community, this is considered to be the Bible of software cost estimating. The other book is a follow-on that was published 19 years later in 2000 called Software Estimating with COCOMO 2. It was written mostly by his PhD students. And an interesting story about these 2 books is that Software Engineering Economics was written while Barry was affiliated with UCLA. So the book cover is blue and gold, the UCLA school colors. Software Estimating with COCOMO 2 was written after Barry became the director of the Center for Systems and Software Engineering at USC. So the book cover is cardinal and gold, the USC school colors. Barry was an early ISPA member and continued his membership with SCIA and then ICEAA. He received the ISPA Fryman Award in 1988 for Lifetime Achievement and also received an award for the Best Journal of Parametrics paper for that year. Barry presented many papers over the years and sent countless PhD students to conferences and local workshops. And speaking of his PhD students, this was his passion. And I think this is one of the qualities that Barry will be most remembered for, helping students, especially his PhD students. Barry had a strategy called win-win, and one of the win-win initiatives was to have his PhD students work with industry organizations to gain experience and at the same time contribute back to the organizations. Barry founded the USC affiliates where organizations contributed money to the Center for Systems and Software Engineering and agreed to help the students with their research. As part of this initiative, I took PhD students on software data collection trips. The students were able to collect data for their research and also helped me with my tasks. It was a lot of fun and it was win-win. In addition to win-win, Barry had many other strategies, including W to the 5th power and the 2 H's principle. So by answering this list of questions, you would characterize your project sufficiently to create a project plan. He also had the cone of uncertainty, which shows that when you start a software development project, your cost uncertainty is plus or minus a factor of 4, and over the life of the project, the uncertainty becomes less and less until completion when you know the exact cost of your project. These are just a couple examples of Barry's clever strategies. And now I'd like to share a story with you dating back to the 1980s when Barry was teaching a course I attended. At the time, presentations were made on transparencies using an overhead projector that would project the material onto the screen. At the beginning of the presentation, Barry's transparencies were neatly typed. Then as the presentation went along, there were handwritten transparencies. And when he got to the end of the handwritten material, he took out one of those old grease pens and started handwriting the material he wanted to communicate onto blank transparencies. It was truly amazing, and I remember it fondly, even after all these years. Another quality that Barry is remembered for is his stellar memory. He kept track of people, places, and a great deal of information. But as Barry's health began failing, Julie Sanchez, the administrator from the CSSE office at USC, moved the office to Barry's home in Santa Monica at his request so he could continue working. Julie basically became Barry's caregiver, working to execute Barry's final wishes. He wanted to set up his last few PhD students for successful completion of their degrees. Barry was a special person. He made great contributions to the software industry and to our software cost estimating community. His enthusiasm and passion will be missed, but I feel Barry's legacy will live on through future contributions of his PhD students. There's a link at the bottom of the page that will take you to an obituary that was put up by Barry's students and friends. It's quite a nice tribute, so take a look at it if you get a chance. And it's been my great honor and privilege to know Barry Bain. I will miss him. And that concludes my remarks.
All right. Well, thank you, Sherry. And as Sherry said, she knew Barry personally. I had heard of him throughout my time being affiliated with ICEAA and ISPA and SCIA. I don't think I ever got to meet him in person, but it was really interesting hearing the background, and I was amazed when Sherry talked about the dedication that Barry had up until the very end, making sure that his students were set up for success. So I would say his legacy is going to continue. When you're that dedicated to making sure your students are going to be successful, I'd say most likely, it will continue going forward in the future. All right, so we will miss you, Barry. Next, I wanted to hand it over to Hank Apgar, who is going to talk about some of the activities that we are doing within the Southern California chapter.
Yes, good morning to all of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon, East Coast. Having an extra minute, I'd also like to share a comment about Barry. I knew him, but not as well as did Sherry. I had met him when I gave him the Parametrician of the Year award, actually the Frank Fryman Award for lifetime service, particularly in developing the Kokomo model. It was presented at the ISPA conference in 1988 in England. That was the only time I met him. However, Barry had a trait of remembering names. And a few months later, I was in Washington, D.C. on the Hertz bus, and I saw somebody getting on that looked like Barry. I'd only met him one time, but I wasn't sure. I was bashful about calling out his name if I were wrong. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Hi, Hank, how are you?" And I was so impressed he remembered me after all these months, after only a one-time meeting. My job today is to talk about design and cost, and we are developing a training course. It was suggested as a project by a number of our members as a critique of previous workshops and seminars. After we started developing it about a year ago, we were asked by the national chapter of ICEAA if we could develop a version that might ultimately be used as part of CBOC. We've been working for 1 year. We have developed a set of topics shown here on this board. It's a course intended for engineers and estimators who know something about modeling, parametric modeling in particular, and the course could be taught also by an estimator who has some experience in affordability or CAVE or in design and cost. As you see by the topic list, this is a practical course, not theoretical, and we do give a lot of information about the process itself. We talk about trade studies, and you might recognize the term trade as an engineering term. And yes, I think design to cost is an engineering or a design function. That's why we call it design to cost. I think one of our quandaries in developing the course was keeping it down to an hour because that was the original guideline. However, we've collected enough information that we could expand the course to an hour and a half or 2 hours if there is a need and a demand. The course outline and rough draft of all the charts have been reviewed by our chapter and also has been reviewed by the ICEAA Board of Directors. So it has met the peer review, and we're currently in the process of cleaning up the charts and making them cohesive and easier to understand. Our next goal is to make a first presentation of the entire DTC course at the SoCal webinar on December 28th. So that gives all of you a chance to see how we're doing and decide if you would like to put a DTC course in your repertoire of training subjects. That concludes my comment. Happy to work with Karen. She's been the motivator and she's kept us working to the grindstone to get it done on time. Thank you, Karen.
Well, thank you, Hank. And I'd also like to recognize Lisa Colabella and Justin Knowles, who have participated a lot in this, and David Bloom. It was his suggestion for coming up with this. And just one minor correction, Hank said we'll be sharing it at our December webinar. So yes, it will be a webinar, but we are also planning to have a face-to-face workshop. So you'll be hearing more about that, the first one since before COVID. All right, moving on. Now we are going to talk about the chapter elections that are upcoming. So I will turn it over to Tom Bosmans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the election season. It is indeed that time of the year where we seek worthy candidates for our Southern California ISPA chapter positions. And the positions are the standard 2-year terms: president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and at-large directors. And if you happen to be interested, please get in touch with me or Rich Harwin. Those are our email addresses, and we will help share what you need to do. We hope to learn who the prospective candidates are by October 15th. In creating your nomination package, basically what you'll want to provide is a brief summary, about a page or so, preferably maybe a little less, that describes your career path, applicable skills, qualifications, and maybe a sentence or two describing your vision for the Southern California chapter and where we can move forward to in the next years. So please get in touch if you have questions, and Rich and I will be happy to guide you. By the way, you can nominate yourself. That's okay. Or you can have someone nominate you, but it will all be done via email. So please get in touch, and we'll have some fun.
And I wanted to oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Tom.
this is a brief description of what each position does during their terms, and the sessions we meet weekly, and they're very lively, and we explore lots of great ideas. But the real excitement in the coming term, of course, is having more in-person functions and activities. So we're really looking forward to that. Seems like it's been forever since we met in person.
And I will add that the time commitment is not all that much. We meet about once a week for 30 minutes, typically. Sometimes we don't meet that often. And then occasionally we'll have a few additional meetings where we're actually planning and putting the final touches on the, most likely the in-person workshops. The webinars don't take as much work. And then other than that, any other activities that people want to get involved in. So like the design to cost course was just a handful of people that decided, hey, we want to be involved in this. So think about it and reach out to any of us if you have questions, if you're not quite sure, but you want to learn a little bit more about what we're doing or what the roles are. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Colabella to introduce our program speaker today.
Thanks, Karen. Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to introduce Brittany Clayton. She's a wonderful operations researcher and a colleague at the RAND Corporation. And she does lifecycle cost estimating there and analysis and acquisition policy research for defense programs. Before joining RAND, Brittany did cost estimating analyses at the Naval Sea Systems Command for 10 years. And she also earned an MS in operations research and a bachelor's degree in mathematics. Brittany has drawn on her cost estimating expertise to conduct research on a variety of interesting topics. And today she'll be talking about one of those, the cost implications of digital engineering, which is a new product innovation and lifecycle management approach with increasing applications across the DoD programs. Over to you, Brittany.
Thanks, Lisa. Let me share my slides here. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if someone can see that?
Yes,
Great.
you can see it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today, and thanks for letting me be a part of your meeting. I am going to talk today about digital engineering and the implications that it has or could have on weapon system costs and the cost estimate. I had the pleasure of presenting this at the ICEAA conference that was held in Pittsburgh, which is where I am. Our RAND office in Pittsburgh is just in Oakland, kind of situated between the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University. So it was nice to just be able to drive down the street and attend the conference. So I had a great time there, and hoping to relay a lot of the same information to you here. As Lisa said, I'm an operations researcher at RAND. I've been here about 4 years. Most of my work relates to cost estimating and also acquisition policy. Before coming to RAND, I was part of NAVC 05C, which does the cost estimating for surface ships, submarines, weapon systems, kind of the whole gambit of maritime systems. So today we're going to talk about a few topics. First, we'll review the project goals and objectives and how RAND attempted to achieve those. Then we'll talk about digital engineering, both in theory and in practice. Then we'll get into some costs that may be impacted by digital engineering. And then finally, identify some areas that need some additional research and attention. So the presentation was based on work that was performed by RAND Project Air Force for AFCA, the Air Force Cost Analysis Agency. It was done in the June 2020 to 2021 timeframe. So if you're familiar with this area and this topic, you know that it's very quick paced and rapidly changing. So please forgive me if any of the information we're going to share today is a bit out of date. This project is a bit dated in terms of digital engineering and its progression. We had a really interesting multidisciplinary team, which included 2 cost estimators, a systems engineer, a mechanical engineer, 2 economists, a policy researcher. So we kind of had a whole interesting group of people that all brought their own perspectives to the table, and it was really a dynamic team and an interesting project. Some of the research questions that we tried to answer were, what does DE or digital engineering mean to the Air Force or the DoD weapon system programs? How are defense programs implementing DE, and what cost elements could be impacted over the system's life cycle? In terms of our methodology, we tried to attack this problem from a few different areas. First, we looked at literature review of existing sources, open source information. We looked for defense examples from other industries. We investigated the government and industry roles within DE, what those traditional roles are and how they're changing. And we took a look at some of the policies that are affecting the implementation of digital engineering or encouraging it. Then we had some discussions with key experts. We talked to digital engineering thought leaders, program offices that were struggling through implementing digital engineering, cost analysts that were struggling with understanding the concept and starting to put it into their cost models. And then we identified a few Pathfinder programs within the Air Force that were implementing DE to a large extent and tried to leverage some of the program-specific documentation for those programs. And then finally, we tried to put the cost estimator spin on it and identify what WBIS elements would most likely be affected by digital engineering, both in terms of investment costs up front and potential savings downstream. And then finally, we documented everything. And we do have a final report that was delivered to AFCA. It is CUI, so if you'd like a copy of it, I can help to get you in touch with the appropriate person at AFCA to get a copy of it. So as digital engineering really takes hold and starts to pick up some traction, most cost estimators will need to account for some level of DE implementation within their cost estimate in some capacity, whether it's upfront investments, downstream benefits, or something in the middle. And this could be in the terms of analysis of alternatives. So even programs that are looking at, clean sheet designs versus modifications or SLEPs to existing systems, that can all be part of the digital engineering, can be part of that conversation that early. Developing lifecycle cost estimates to make sure that you have those line items budgeted for investment costs, software, training, things like that. If you're looking at cost benefit analysis or trade-off studies. And finally, if you're thinking about where your cost estimate falls on your S-curve, kind of where your confidence level is, digital engineering can have an impact on that as well. So I challenge you as we're going through these slides just think in the back of your mind, how would you address DE in your current cost estimates? Are you doing so already? And interested to hear about what additional research you think needs to be done for you to successfully incorporate DE into cost estimates. We are starting a follow-on effort to this project next week. Actually, it starts at the start of the fiscal year in conjunction with SAF and AFCA. So we're still thinking about a lot of these things, metrics to assess digital engineering, the impacts that digital engineering has on the supply chain, things like that. So any ideas, suggestions, questions, I will be jotting down notes for our future work as well. Okay, so let's take a minute just to kind of characterize what digital engineering means in theory and what we're seeing so far in practice. So bear with me on this one. This is a mouthful, but DoD defines digital engineering as an integrated digital approach that uses authoritative sources of system data and models as a continuum across disciplines to support lifecycle activities from concept through disposal. So very overwhelming, very wordy, but if we break it down, we can kind of see what the pieces each mean. So the first part is an integrated digital approach. So this is developing digital products wherever they can that talk to each other. And this can mean everything from a 3D model of the physical system to the cost estimates that is based on some of the technical inputs that would be within the 3D model or the design, to programmatics, the budgeting models, the scheduling models, if you have any sort of logistics model or maintenance model, trying to make those as integrated and interdependent as possible is really the goal here. So that if the engineers or someone on the technical side changes the weight of a system or of a component, it can immediately be filtered through to the cost estimate and the CERs that you have built that are weight-based in your estimate. So really trying to integrate, if you envision kind of a spider web of models that can talk to each other. It's a little overwhelming, but that's kind of the ultimate goal, that everything is connected and talking to each other where it can. The next part is authoritative sources of data and models. So trying to come up with this authoritative source of truth, and you'll hear people say ASOT for authoritative source of truth. So there's a one-stop shop for everybody that's involved in the program, all of the stakeholders that can access the latest designs, the latest programmatics, the latest costs and budget, funding, and logistics, and kind of one stop for all of this information that anyone in the program would need to have access to. So managing that access, managing the accuracy and up-to-datedness of that information can be a little daunting, but that's kind of the ideal universe that DE is trying to accomplish. The next part is across disciplines. So again, this is not just for the engineers that are designing the system. This is for the program office, for the cost estimators, for the maintainers. It should be touching and part of everybody's culture. When we finally reach digital engineering enlightenment across a program. And then finally, support lifecycle activities. So this should start really early on during the requirements setting, through the AOA, into contract award, through production, into sustainment, and then disposal. So it really should touch every life cycle. And we have a chart coming up in a few slides that kind of outlines some of the activities that can be done at each of those phases. So if you're familiar with defense acquisition and have been a part of some acquisition processes and milestones, you can totally appreciate that this is a daunting task. Just trying to do any one piece of these things can be very overwhelming. And a lot of the feedback we got was just the configuration management of trying to maintain all of this information and keep it up to date can be a bit overwhelming. But this is kind of the final phase of digital engineering once it is entirely achieved. So the Air Force is pursuing digital engineering along with some other similar initiatives that can be difficult to strip out and to identify which impact is caused by which initiative. You'll hear things like open architecture, agile software development, and DE as kind of the digital trinity that Air Force is trying to pursue. It can be difficult to kind of break out what impacts are tied to each of the initiatives. There is some policy within Air Force that encourages all program managers to utilize DE to the maximum extent they can. And you'll see some development of new offices and new roles that are dedicated to digital engineering. There's a digital engineering guidebook that the Air Force has created that goes into a lot of detail on implications throughout the life cycle of a defense system, contract language that should be negotiated into the contract early on. And you'll see similar types of policies and guidance at the DoD level and across the other services as well. So here we have a life cycle chart. You're probably familiar with this acquisition process chart at the top. The Air Force Digital Engineering Guidebook, which was published, I believe, in 2018. And forgive me if there's been an update. I think they were at the time working on it as we were leveraging it for this research. So there could be some updates. But it was very good in identifying activities that would tie to a particular point in the weapon system life cycle that the government should start to undertake to start to implement digital engineering. So a few of these really starting early on during MSA and TMRR, establishing model-based links between mission capability, system capability, all the way as early as the AOA stage, using modeling to define requirements and acquisition strategies. So trying to keep in mind what role the program office is going to have in DE, what the contractor is going to be doing, how those roles and responsibilities are going to play out throughout the life cycle, starting to think about that as early as MSA and TMRR. Starting to develop some model-centric RFP and source selection and acquisition type processes, defining requirements that the prime contractor is going to need to share with the government. This is a big one, trying to get the appropriate level of technical data rights, intellectual property, models, software packages in the contract early and get it negotiated into the contract as early as possible will help to get the Air Force and each of the services the information that they need to sustain the program throughout its life. And then if we fast forward into EMD, establishing in-house digital engineering capabilities and expertise. One area of weakness that we heard as we spoke with a lot of experts and a lot of program managers is that the expertise on this stuff, on systems engineering and on kind of understanding some of these 3D models is lacking in a lot of the program offices. So trying to build up that workforce and that knowledge within each of the program offices could definitely take some work and some deliberate planning. Making sure the contractor will digitally share things like design, model, data, and IP at the appropriate time, getting the government more engaged and more of a seat at the table during some of these discussions and design reviews, as opposed to just a recipient of some of the designs. Streamlining technical reviews. So one of the examples a program office gave us in our discussion with them was, if you're familiar with the milestone process, and as you go through a decision review or a milestone decision review, it's often a tabletop discussion with hard copies of a PowerPoint slide deck in front of you, and you're kind of flipping through these very static slides and trying to understand what's going on. They're trying to push that type of review into a more digital space. So instead of a hard copy PowerPoint, you're looking at models on the screen that are dynamic, that you can adjust the quantity of your cost estimate, for example, to see the impact, or adjust the CPM line that you have built in to see what the impacts are for the budget. So starting to do a little bit more interactive reviews and some more dynamic type reviews is a push during the EMD phase, and probably would continue into production as well. And then finally, in production and deployment, and then in ONS, maintaining and updating that data, those models, making sure that the appropriate level of information and data is accessible to all the stakeholders, that if anybody involved with the project needs to get updated information, they can do so. Using models to inform cost and schedule trades, making sure you're doing that for things like enhancements and modifications, leveraging data and models in the pursuit of predictive maintenance. So if we can be better at predicting when things are going to fail, or establishing a better maintenance regimen in order to avoid some of those failures, can be very helpful and beneficial throughout the life cycle of a platform. What we learned in talking to several program offices, and when we spoke about some of those activities, we learned that no one project is implementing all of those activities that we just went through. We found that program offices were kind of identifying certain aspects of those activities that they wanted to see and benefit from and kind of spend and invest their money in. So we found it difficult that, there was no kind of one stop or one answer for all programs. Everything was handled a little bit differently. We also found that a lot of the people that we were speaking with had very different definitions of what digital engineering meant to them. So this could, it ended up taking the majority of our conversation was just trying to define what DE meant to their program office, how they were implementing it, things like that. And we found that some of this was due to just the location of where their program was within its life cycle. So if it was really early on, it could kind of take advantage of using DE through the AOA timeframe, through requirements establishment. It could get some of those line items and contract negotiations into the contract early. If the program was a little bit more mature and those ships, that ship had sailed in terms of getting things into the contract, they were limited in what they could actually implement. We also found that just enthusiasm and expertise within the program office and within its leadership teams really helped to dictate what the team understood in terms of digital engineering and how kind of excited and passionate they were about implementing digital engineering, or pessimistic and not excited about implementing it. We spoke with a few programs, and I don't have names in this presentation to protect the innocent, but Program A was in its TMRR, and it was using things like high fidelity digital models to try to support faster deployment times, troubleshoot the design and assembly, take a look at multiple design iterations before it decided on a system to field. Program B was in its EMD phase. They were using a lot of training simulators, modeling-based systems engineering, and 3D design tools in concert with the prime contractor. And Program C was also in EMD. The government in this program had decided to own the government reference architecture and try to really have ownership over all of the moving parts within the design, and making sure they had all the data for some organic maintenance down the road. So in some literature that we reviewed around the 2020 timeframe, Staff AQ leadership was confident that digital engineering would yield some benefits in a few areas. I think that's probably still the case, although I think there's been some updated publications and research in this area since this study has been done. But some of those benefits were reported at the system level. So identifying more accurate requirements to avoid cost overruns, iterating design, so looking at a wider trade space to see what system was optimal and we should field, moving down the cost improvement curve faster, getting to a better design faster. So again, opening up that trade space and then getting to an optimal solution more quickly, allowing for creation of designs that were so complex that they could not be developed or accomplished without the use of some of these sophisticated models. So in terms of system benefits, Staff AQ leadership was confident that they could reach some of those types of advantages. In terms of portfolio, across all of the portfolio, trying to get commodified design and process to allow faster cycle and more competition, having more development cycles, getting to more frequent program starts because the acquisition is going at a faster pace, and then just kind of guiding portfolio development with greater accuracy and making sure that the quality and the performance of our systems are optimal. So in our research, what we identified is that there are a few key and critical assumptions that need to be met in order to accomplish some of these benefits that were purported as potential benefits for DE. And some of them are DoD and DAF wide, some are based on industry, and some are just kind of the nature of this new philosophy of digital engineering that people just aren't used to. In terms of assumptions at the DoD and DAF level, making sure that DE enables acquisition speed that overmatches the enemy, so we're keeping up with our adversaries, implementing all of these benefits at scale across the portfolio, and that they see some sort of sustainment savings, at least partially, to offset the development and procurement cost increases that they're also expecting to see. In terms of industry needs to be willing to, play ball with the government. They have to be able to come to the table and understand what the Air Force is trying to accomplish and be willing to participate and kind of be an active role in that relationship. We found largely that they were interested in kind of getting the Air Force up to speed. We learned that industry is doing a lot of digital engineering already. So they're a few steps ahead of where the Air Force is coming in. So that was another interesting tidbit that we had. But most of the industry counterparts that we spoke with were eager and willing to help the Air Force kind of get on the same page. And then finally, just the nature of digital engineering, that the authoritative source of truth will get the right information to the right people at the right time. I mean, that can be, in terms of configuration management, very difficult to do. So just trusting that DE will work as it should was another assumption that would help to realize some of the benefits that we stated above. So we found plenty of anecdotal evidence of digital engineering and MBSE benefits. We could not find a lot of hard data that supported a lot of these benefits. It was much easier to talk in terms of investments because getting our head around additional training or software packages was much easier to quantify than some of the benefits. However, we did see some more qualitative type benefits and potentially non-cost related benefits. Things like physical prototyping and physical T&E. If you can bring some of that physical prototypes or tests into the digital space and reduce the need for those physical tests and those physical prototypes, that could be a cost savings, could also help on the quality side, make sure that we're building exactly what we want to build, could help to reduce rework and things like that. In terms of weapon system maintenance and modifications and capabilities, using digital twins and some other digital artifacts to help us predict the failures of certain components, help us develop system capabilities in a more accurate and robust way. All of these things are really driving the Air Force and the other services to pay more attention to digital engineering. And then, of course, the last one, kind of IP ownership to the government. As the government continues to buy and purchase technical data rights and intellectual property, they can leverage that across programs if legally in their contract they're able to do that. So they have more of a basis for some of these systems in terms of the IP ownership. We reviewed a lot of papers. We found a handful that had some hard data that pointed to some cost savings. Most did not, but most had some of this kind of anecdotal or qualitative type benefits explained. Okay, so here's the so what, right? I mean, we're all cost estimators. What does this mean to me? Where am I going to start implementing it? We spoke with a lot of cost analysts on the Air Force side and elsewhere to try to understand their main challenges and concerns with implementing digital engineering into the cost estimate? Where should these two be married up? We found a lot of the same comments as when we spoke with the engineers and the program offices. Uncertainty around what digital engineering means to the Air Force. Familiarity with digital engineering concepts vary. So every program office is doing something just slightly differently. So there's not kind of one clean methodology that we can apply to every estimate. Challenges with isolating DE from some of the other initiatives that we spoke about. So agile acquisition, open system architecture, they're all going to save tons of money and schedule and make a system that's more quality. But it's difficult sometimes to isolate which of those initiatives should result in savings, and so that can be a bit of a challenge. And again, differences in how programs are implementing digital engineering, in what language each program office spoke in terms of DE, how they were implementing it, how they defined it within their program, and not a whole lot of guidance. We found a general feeling of confusion around roles and responsibilities of the contractor versus the government. So who's responsible for which actions and which 3D model and which design review, and kind of not a clear delineation between roles and responsibilities there. We heard concerns about classification levels that are going to create challenges with integration and sharing data and models. So as soon as you throw something on the high side, it can be very difficult to pass it from government to government, from government to contractor, contractor back to government. So just the transition and integration of some of those data and models can be challenging when you're not working in an unclassified space. The enterprise efforts to support digital engineering, so things like training opportunities, defining what DE means to the Air Force, investing in computing power, software licenses and tools, that was still being defined during our project. I think this situation has improved quite a bit in the last year and a half or so. And I'm eager to kind of get back into this world and see how the policy and the guidance has changed in the last year. And finally, there's limited evidence and very little methodology to support adjusting a program cost estimate or point estimate to account for digital engineering. So we heard a lot of the cost estimators say, I get it, this is supposed to be great and it's supposed to save the Air Force a lot of time and money, but there's no hard data behind there. So I don't have the comfort level to reduce my program costs or account for savings in the long term if that data is not there. So certainly something we can all, I think, appreciate. So some discussions from these cost analysts could point at some recommendations that we came up with. So in terms of defining digital engineering, working closely with program offices and program management to understand how that program is defining digital engineering, what actions on that lifecycle chart they are trying to implement and endeavor to undertake is really critical. One of the things we talked about with a lot of the cost estimators is just making sure we can talk the talk to the engineers, and we're asking for the right level of information. We're asking for the right implementation, what kind of actions are the program office taking. Things like that can be very helpful to set the stage early on for DE implementation throughout the life. In terms of implementation, we found that it may be best to deliberately take some different approaches to leveraging these digital models. There's not going to be a one-stop methodology that every cost estimator can implement across all of their programs or all their estimates. It's going to be a very tailored approach. We talked a little bit about cost savings versus cost avoidance, and I think most of us have probably struggled with that at some point in our careers and trying to explain the difference between a cost savings and a cost avoidance. We encourage the cost analysts to adopt a cost avoidance mindset. So instead of taking, bottom line reductions in their estimate, doing some other things to try to communicate a cost avoidance as opposed to a cost savings. In terms of measuring the impact of digital engineering, we found that investment costs could be pretty easily quantified and identified. Things like attending training, purchasing software packages, purchasing software licenses, things like that can be fairly straightforward. But the downstream benefits and the kind of the enterprise impact that DE may have on the Air Force is going to be much more difficult and will take a lot more time. In terms of stakeholder relationships, we identified that the Air Force, and I think this is similar to some of the other services as well, their expertise and knowledge in systems engineering has diminished over the last decade or so. So building that expertise and that knowledge base back up is going to definitely take some time and some deliberate recruiting and hiring of the right sorts of engineers and systems engineers to undertake what the Air Force is trying to accomplish here. Okay, so we started to identify some specific investments. I'm actually going to flip to the next slide because we tried to map it to the lines of effort that the Air Force has identified as part of their digital engineering initiative. So the 6 blue boxes across the top there are the 6 lines of effort, or LOEs, that the Air Force has identified. They're kind of 6 main areas of focus, and as your program office starts to implement and kind of brainstorm how they're going to be implementing digital engineering, they'll likely be playing within these 6 streams or 6 major efforts. So we tried to identify some investment costs that could fall into each one of these 6 streams, and we tried to identify which would be a program office expense and what would be kind of an Air Force enterprise level expense. And the orange identifies the Air Force enterprise would be paying for some of those activities. And the blue boxes, the blue line, indicates something that would be tied to the program office budget. As we were speaking with some of the SMEs across the program offices, we heard some exact and more tangible examples of investments for DE. So, one office was funding 3 to 4 FTEs dedicated to DevSecOps. Another one was dedicating 1 FTE to kind of hardware interconnectivity and connection to the cloud. So those are very tangible things. And as cost estimators, we can take that and quantify that in terms of an additional FTE within a program office, and that can be pretty easily quantified. So some of the investments we felt more comfortable in suggesting some approaches or methodologies to account for, things like training courses and things like that. So we started to develop a framework for the Air Force to start considering these costs and benefits. And a lot of this is largely based on the Air Force's DE guidebook. And we kind of try to put a cost estimating spin on it. But we identified that investments, there are upfront costs required to create enablers of digital engineering. Those enablers could be mapped to those 6 lines of efforts that we just showed you, which would enable certain activities or tasks to be performed by the program office and contractors to implement DE and then achieve some sort of digital engineering enlightenment, and at some point see hopefully some downstream benefits, both cost and non-cost benefits throughout the life of the program. We identified that the cost estimate kind of aims to account for the bookends of this graphic. So we're really concerned about investments that are going to be need to be paid for upfront in the program, and then the downstream benefits as potentially as you start saving costs and reduced rework or reduced test and evaluation or improved maintenance. You could see some savings there. One thing that we identified is that in terms of order of execution, you're kind of walking up these steps from left to right. You purchase the investments, which creates the enablers, which enables the activities, which achieves some sort of digital engineering environment. But in terms of planning, we should actually be working backwards down the steps. So a program office could or should start thinking about the benefits that they want to accomplish using digital engineering, and then work backwards to identify the activities they need to do to achieve that level or those benefits. What enablers need to be purchased to achieve those activities, and then what investments need to be made up front. So kind of working a little bit backwards down the steps in terms of planning, although your execution is going to be forward. So we came up with just a generalized process that can be repeated across multiple programs, working to include DE into the cost estimate. One is really critical, and everybody that we spoke with in this project was already doing this, is to familiarize the cost team with the concept and goals of digital engineering. There's some really good resources out there, like the Digital Engineering Guidebook. There's some DoD papers that are out there, some other white papers. Being able to talk the talk and use the right terminology when you're sitting down with the program office and with the engineers is really critical, and can really avoid a lot of confusion as you're trying to interpret what they're doing on the engineering side and within the program office to then incorporate into your cost estimate. The second one, again, to kind of coordinate with your program office to understand how they're implementing. We suggested to the analysts that we were talking with to take those actions that the Digital Engineering Guidebook lays out and try to identify through the life cycle what the program office is trying to accomplish. We also suggested trying to map those activities to enablers that would be required to accomplish those activities. The third major item in this methodology is to identify specific investments and benefits that are applicable to the estimate, making sure your investments line up with enablers. So kind of developing this crosswalk between activities to enablers to investments, and then mapping those investments to your work breakdown structure so that you can, increase or decrease those line items within your estimate. And then finally, incorporate the costs and benefits as you see fit. We suggested, obviously you could be adjusting your point estimate if you're confident enough in some of the investments or some of the savings. You could incorporate this into your uncertainty analysis, which could also help determine where on your S-curve you fall. Perhaps you gain more confidence in your point estimate because of digital engineering, or it reduces the width of your distributions on a particular input because you're more confident in how digital engineering is going to perform. And then finally, developing sensitivity analysis and kind of running some excursions off of your point estimate. We focus really on the first three steps of this in this current project, in the project that I'm presenting to you now. As we move forward into our FY23 project, we're going to dig in a little bit more to items 3 and 4, along with getting kind of an update on what's been happening in the DE landscape. Okay, so then finally, just identifying some areas of additional research and attention. We recommended that AFCA and any service really that's endeavoring to take into account digital engineering develop a repository of program information. One of the challenges that the cost analyst communicated to us is that the analogous systems and the historical data that we're using to build our future estimates don't have a lot of this stuff in them. So trying to provide some context to what programs and what data are potentially a result of certain aspects of digital engineering is really going to be critical, and providing that context and that story behind how a program implemented it is really going to be important. The Air Force also has 23 digital engineering features, some of which are listed there. So things like the government reference architecture, digital twin, digital threads, intellectual property. Those are some features that the Air Force has identified as critical in the success of digital engineering. So trying to track some of those features for current and new projects will be important for the project after next to review that historical information. Collecting relevant cost information on digital engineering specific requirements. So not only trying to understand what the program office is doing, but understanding how the contractor is also within the contract, forced to or required to adopt or implement some of this digital engineering will really be important as well. Continuing to validate savings from DE specific activities, impacts on the cost improvement curve, resulting savings from tests or resulting shortening of schedules, consistently trying to identify whether our assumptions were correct is really going to be critical as well, and going to be kind of an iterative process as these programs mature. And then finally, integrating with the Air Force's maturity metrics. These are metrics that capture a program's level of digital engineering engagement. So trying to understand the infrastructure, the modeling, the processes and policies, the workforce and culture that were used for particular projects that we're implementing DE is going to be really important moving forward. And then we recommended also that the Department of the Air Force continue to progress the DE agenda, invest in DE infrastructure and workforce, make sure that you are explicit and deliberate in the recruitment and the hiring of systems engineers and engineers that understand a lot of this digital space. That's going to be a long-term effort. I think it's, you're not going to have skilled systems engineers back in the Air Force overnight. So it's going to need to be deliberate and persistent. Developing a plan to assess programs' efforts, claims, and impacts. So constantly identifying how a program is implementing digital engineering and then tracking that progression. The program offices that we spoke with were required to have a digital engineering strategy and a few other pieces of documentation to help really document what their program office was doing. So just continuing that and starting to collect some of those pieces of information will be helpful. Investigate how digital engineering efforts are impacting suppliers and supply chains. That's another part of this upcoming study that we're working on. We're hoping to get speak with some of the major suppliers and players in the supply chains to really see how that flow down of information and requirements is working and what the challenges are there. And then integrating core systems engineering practices with digital engineering concepts. So getting everybody more familiar with what digital engineering means, how it is similar and different from systems engineering, and trying to just kind of shift the culture within the Air Force so everyone's thinking in more of a digital space is going to be really critical as the Air Force endeavors to implement DE in the coming years. Okay, that is all I have. Sorry I spoke so long. I didn't even stop for questions. Is there any questions at this point?
All right, so this is Karen. And so if folks have questions, you can put them in the chat or and either write them out or ask to be unmuted. I think Megan can give you that option. And so while you are thinking of your questions, I wanted to start with a question. And you did allude to this. So there's not a lot of data out there that will help us accurately estimate the impact of implementing digital engineering into our programs, whether it's at actual savings or an upfront cost. So how can we, as say contractors, get our government customers to believe the estimates that we create? So, how can we credibly capture the potential reductions or the potential impact with digital engineering?
I think that's going to be a long road. I think it's going to take a while for that trust and that relationship to continue to develop. One of the things we're hearing a little bit more just within recent experience is some anecdotal type evidence. So, you may not have data on an entire system or an entire platform, but there could be specific examples or tangible examples within test and evaluation or within the supply chain that can be pointed to as kind of success stories. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, especially one thing we heard was kind of looking back at the historical data and, for analogous systems, it's impossible really to tell if any level of digital engineering was implemented in those projects, on the contractor side, on the government side. So starting to contextualize and build that story so that we can identify a program, its data, and then what sorts of digital engineering activities it has implemented. That's going to be important.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Let's see, Megan, do we have any questions that have come in the chat?
We did. We just got one in now that says, has the project discussed how to accomplish the familiarization and DE understanding for the PMO and PM functions so that the selected desired benefits can be confidently identified for a given program and its unique challenges?
That's a great question. We did not identify specific strategies that a program office can take to help with this familiarization. I think part of it starts at the top, just making digital engineering and some of its terminology more familiar with, the entirety of the Air Force, or whatever service we're talking about. I think that that is going to need to be a cultural shift. And I think I've seen some of that progression already in the last few years. I mean, people are more familiar with the term digital engineering than they were when we started this project 2 or 2.5 years ago. So I think we're getting there. In terms of the program office, I don't know the answer to that. I can say that from the program offices that we spoke with, a lot of it was dependent on whether they had someone that they considered a digital engineering lead. So some of them had a no kidding DE expert or a DE lead that was in charge of all of the DE implementation. If that role is there, I think it makes it a little easier because that person is dedicated to the communication and kind of proliferation of digital engineering, and the passion and the energy coming from the program management leadership team, from the digital engineering team, if there is one, the people that we spoke with that were very passionate about implementing digital engineering for their program offices tended to have a team that was more well-versed in the digital engineering terminology and how they were going to accomplish it, what sorts of challenges to expect. So I think part of it is top down from the enterprise and then kind of top down from the program office level. If that answers your question. I think it's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge though.
Okay, so for those of you who may be still formulating your questions, I've got another one. I actually have quite a few, but I am going to give other people a chance to ask their questions too. So early on in the presentation, you were talking about, I actually wrote it down. It was on slide 10. Some of the changes that you see from the engineering side and from the industry side and from the program side. I think it was that slide. But you mentioned that there is a shift from going from the hard copy type of reviews to more of the model or digital type of reviews. And I was interested in any insights that you've gained from customers that you've talked to, either the government side or the contractor side, how that's actually being implemented, and is it of value? Because the reason I bring this up is because I know that some people have said, hey, we got to get rid of PowerPoint and just go directly to the models and show people things in the model.
Yeah.
But the problem is that if people are not familiar with how the model is set up or just that software, trying to follow things, it's like, I always think it helps to have a PowerPoint or something to kind of set the stage and explain what's going to happen, what they're going to see in the model, and then go into the model. But I was interested in your perspective on that.
I think that's a really good point. I think it probably will be some sort of hybrid or marriage between this is the information we want to convey to you, this is going to be static, and then we'll demonstrate, kind of do a demonstration within the model itself. The program offices that we spoke with said it was helpful in the program office or the engineering team understanding the design and some of the critical design reviews and some of those major milestones that the program goes through. However, it was painful because it was very much in the weeds of these models, and you know, if anyone's done a live model demonstration, inevitably something goes wrong and you hit the wrong button or you put the wrong input in and all of a sudden everything crashes. So there was a lot of that in the program office that we spoke with. They said it was very long days, you know, a design review that usually took a few hours, you know, a limited sort of milestone review that would take a few hours was actually taking days on end, where everybody was in the room staring at Excel or staring at the software package and kind of poking through the model and identifying where their questions were. So yeah, I think it probably will be some sort of hybrid of the concrete information they need to convey with the answers already kind of populated, and then a demonstration of the tool to play around with its functionality, I think.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I can definitely see how easy it would be to go down into the weeds into a model, and especially when you have such a large audience and somebody's going to be interested in the lowest level of detail and they are going to monopolize the conversation.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, if you think of some of your cost models, they get very detailed. There are lots of tabs, and sometimes it's just a little overwhelming if you don't have the time to kind of to poke around and play around with it. Can be overwhelming to present that to a whole group of people where questions are flying at you.
Right. Okay. Megan, I see there's at least one more in the chat. I don't know if any came into you specifically, but would you like to read that one?
Sure thing. Next question is, do you think it would be possible to implement DE in a production program ahead of implementing in a development program? Could the benefits of this perhaps be more direct alignment of savings to DE activities?
That's a great question. One thing that we learned is that the later a program in its acquisition lifecycle was trying to implement digital engineering, the less freedom or opportunity it had to implement digital engineering. So once you get past contract negotiations and the prime is on contract, you lose a lot of opportunity to implement, you know, requirements into the contract. Often the design is mature enough that you kind of lose some opportunities to influence that. It may be easier. I think the question is getting at the direct correlation between a production, implementing DE in a production program and drawing, you know, the straight line to the savings that could be seen either in production or past production. That definitely could be. You may just have limited opportunities to do so because you may not have the negotiating power that you would have pre-contract award. I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay, and I see that we do have a question from Ken Sperry. Megan, are you able to unmute him?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, great. Good presentation. Thank you, Brittany, and thank you for hosting this, Karen. Really, one question and one comment. The question, is there a difference between the traditional, what we call model-based engineering and digital engineering, or are they synonymous, or any subtle differences you could point out?
I would say that they are not synonymous, and I'm sure I could find some references that would help clarify this. I think the digital engineering, in terms of the buzzword that is digital engineering in the Air Force right now, is trying to get the Air Force up to speed and kind of more of a participant at the table in some of these design reviews and some of this engineering, and trying to integrate a lot of things. MBSE has been around for a long time, and actually we heard from several SMEs that MBSE, systems engineering, digital engineering, they've been done for a long time, and a lot of it's just best practices that engineers have been doing for a long time, and trying to streamline a lot of and digitize a lot of these actions. So I think that there's some nuance between the terms that are being used within the Air Force now and kind of traditional modeling-based systems engineering, but it is all kind of in the same umbrella. of
Okay.
activities.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And then one, just a comment, I was working with Rand and the Air Force for a number of years, and we built a very elaborate ONS cost model based on 65503. And one of the first questions the customer had is, how do you I know if I should trust it? How do we know anything about the accuracy of these forecasts? You're predicting savings, but how do I know I should trust anything? And so one of the techniques I used was to back up to a previous year where I had actual cost data and loaded the actuarial programmatics into my model and let it predict. And it predicted what my actuals were for a previous year within about 5%. And so that gave me confidence that, yes, my model's working. And so, the question always is, how do you validate that model? That why should I trust it? And so anyhow, that was just a technique we used. And it was, I think, convincing, and everybody agreed that, hey, we loaded it with previous year data and it produced what we saw that year. So anyhow, just thought I'd pass that along. That's always a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's helpful.
And that's an interesting idea, Ken. And well, interesting in the sense that it's a good idea, but lots of times program management will be like, I don't want you to recreate something that happened years ago. I want you to focus on what's going to happen.
Right.
So trying to get their support, their budget to actually do that may be a whole other question or issue that you have to solve.
Right.
So I think at this point, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I think at this point, we will go ahead and let Brittany off the hook. But if you do have additional questions for her, or if you have ideas for that they should take their research, please send them to her. And Brittany, I would like to hear more about you said you're kicking off the second phase soon. So as that's progressing, keep us in the loop. I'd like to hear more about that.
Certainly. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk today.
All right. And then we do have a few more things to go over. Let me share my slide here. All right. Wait, I'm not sharing it, am I? Hold on. I think it is this one that I want to share. Okay. So we did want to bring your attention to a couple of events or activities or dates that are coming up. And so Megan, I will let you talk to the first one about the dues.
That is right. You guys have until Friday to renew or extend your membership. This isn't just for new or expired members. If you want to add another year or two onto your membership at the current rates, go ahead and do so by Friday, because on Saturday they're going to go up to $150 a year and $270 for 2 years.
All right. And if you're not sure when your membership expires, you can always reach out to the chapter, or the officers of the chapter, or to Megan, the office, and they will let you know when your expiration date is. Megan, I think going in order, the next one would be the one in the middle. Would you like to talk to that one?
My pleasure. And this one is a month later. This is the abstract deadline for the 2023 workshop in San Antonio. This is your 75-word abstract. That's all you need to have at this point. This is what is going to tell our review committee what you're thinking about presenting and what your idea is, and it gives them a sense of what you want to present. And then from those, we pick the top 70-some papers that we'll get on the schedule. And then you have until February 22nd in order to send your first draft of your PowerPoint or your white paper if you want to be considered for a Best Paper Award. But none of that can happen unless you get your abstract in by November 1st. So start thinking, if you haven't already, of what's going to get you to San Antonio.
And I'd like to encourage people, if you've been working on anything related to digital engineering or model-based systems engineering or any of those buzzwords, to put in an abstract, and maybe we'll have enough topics to actually have a full day of focused on digital engineering topics. Okay, so the next one is coming up about 10 days later, November 10th. I don't think it's been advertised yet because we're still working out the details, but the OEM COG, or the Original Equipment Manufacturers Cooperative Opportunities Group. Yes, it's a mouthful. We are having our next webinar, industry webinar, on November 10th. The intended audience is OEMs, but you do not have to be an OEM. You could be in the government, you could be a CETA contractor, you could be not in the industry at all. The topic is looking at design to cost, and what we're planning on doing is having a discussion on design to cost and then showing an example in practice. So we're still working out the details on that, but that is the plan as of now. Then the next one, I'm going to jump back to the left-hand side. Our face-to-face ICEAA Southern California Chapter workshop, the first one since before COVID. So tentatively, it's scheduled for December 7th. And I say tentatively because we just found out that there is an industry, I think some working days industry days scheduled for that same week. So we want to make sure there's not a conflict since some of the members or some of the attendees would be going to both. So we will follow up on the exact date, but it will be in El Segundo. It's being hosted by Techaloti, and there will be an online component for those of you who are outside of the area. One of the things we will be doing at this workshop is giving a preview of the design to cost course that we put together. Then, of course, we'll have a keynote speaker as well as additional presenters and some networking opportunities. So stay tuned for that. It will be sometime in early December. And then lastly, I will let Megan talk about this. It was just a sort of a reminder to keep this in mind. It's not due yet, but Megan, would you like to?
The deadline for the 2023 Association Awards, which are presented at the workshop, that's going to be March 15th. Sometimes this can seem like a daunting thing, but it's really not. It's about a page or two to tell us about somebody who has made an impact in the association or the industry at large, be it a team, a manager, somebody achieving a technical milestone, junior analyst of the year, or folks who have been around forever and have given us a lifetime of work and support for the Fryman Award and the Association Service Award. So go ahead on to ICEAonline.com/awards to sort of see what the criteria are and think about who might be a good choice for one of the awards next year.
Right, and I wanted to bring that to people's attention because oftentimes it's something that we don't think about until, oh, the deadline's next week. Oh, I don't have time to do this. But if you start thinking about it now, think of your colleagues, whether the people that are in your own company or that people that you know from ICEAA, from the different chapters, from different organizations that are involved in the industry. All right, and with that, I think we have one more slide. I would like to thank Brittany again. Brittany, we will be sending you the Southern California Chapter coin. It looks like this. It says ICEAA Southern California Chapter. I think ICEAA is spelled out here, and then on the back, there are some types of programs that are more common in Southern California than other parts of the area, representing the Southern California chapter. So that will be on its way to you.
Thank you very much.
And then I would like to thank everyone for attending. Please let us know if you have a topic that you would like to present in the future, or if you have a topic that you would like to hear about, but you don't necessarily have anything to present. Or if you have potential or ideas for potential speakers, let us know. We're always looking for speakers and interesting topics. So with that, that is all I have. So I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone face to face in December. And until then, thanks again for attending. All right, bye-bye.